when I was in 4th grade, there was one Jewish girl, and then we had a Catholic boy move in, and everyone else was Mormon. I really thought that represented the entire world at that time. I remember telling somebody, well, yeah, most people in the world are Mormons, and the ones who are Catholic. So, like,
oh my God,
there's a few hundred Catholics out there, and then a handful of Jews. that's what I
know. And that's it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Post-Mormon Parenting. I'm Rachel, and today we've got some very special guests. We've got Jared Higdon from My Spiritual Life. You may recognize him in such things as Sister Jensen, which we all know and love. Thank you so much for being with us, Jared.
Of course.
And we also have Lexi from Exmo Lex and her husband Brendon are joining us today. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So good to see you all. Yeah. So what I wanted to do tonight is talk about Elder Oaks' talk in Saturday afternoon, I believe it was. No, sorry, Saturday morning session of conference. So this is Saturday, October 3rd, 2020. And he gave this really long and kind of winding talk that hit on a lot of different kinds of points and was also kind of confusing. So rather than go through it like just on my own, I thought it would be really, really nice to have all of you guys here with me too. And we can get your thoughts and ideas on the things that he said and like what he meant by it, where he was going with that, all that kind of thing. So what we'll do is I'll talk a little bit about like a part of the talk, and then we can talk about questions that we might have or reactions or whatever. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Let's do it. Awesome. Let's begin. First of all, this was like a really long talk to get through. And I don't know about you guys, but it was like just so hard to understand. Were you guys confused about parts of it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it felt like it jumped around.
Yeah. How long did you say it was?
Well, like the talk itself isn't that long, but
like 16 minutes.
He goes on and on.
Yeah. Okay, so first, I want to give him credit where credit is due. He does quote Jesus a few times in this talk, which I noticed was kind of a theme at conference this weekend. Was like it was way more Jesus than it was last time. Last time was all about like the restoration and Joseph Smith, and very, very little mention about Jesus or Jesus's words. And so I feel like they did a lot better with that this time around. So he starts out by quoting Jesus when he says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said that thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy, but I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you, do good to them that hurt you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." And he talks about how loving our enemies and adversaries is not easy, and most of us have not even reached that stage of love and forgiveness, saying it requires a self-discipline almost greater than we are capable of, but it must be essential, for it is part of the Savior's 2 great commandments to love the Lord thy God and to love thy neighbor as thyself. So credit where credit is due. Like that was a good point. I feel like, but then he goes into talking about how anger is Satan's tool. He quotes President Hinckley about this. He says to be angry is to yield to the influence of Satan. And he talks from the Book of Mormon as well. For verily I say unto you, he that hath the spirit of contention is not of me, but is of the devil, who is the father of contention, and he stirreth up the hearts of men to contend with anger one with another. So I don't know about you guys, but growing up, LDS or Mormon, I always felt this way as well. Like you should never be angry. If you are, you're under this influence of Satan. You need to repent. But since coming out, I've realized, like, wait a minute, actually, I think anger is kind of a useful tool. And I'm still like trying to learn more about our emotions. So what kind of conclusions have you guys come to about like anger? Like, do you guys still see it as this thing that's like, this is a bad thing and you must never feel this? Or does it have any kind of place in your life? Lexi and Brendon, let's talk to you guys first. What are your guys' thoughts about this?
So that's kind of one of the things that I thought about too when I was going over the talk, because the church, like you said, I remember being in it and feeling like anger is just completely negative. And like, you know, every time it was even talked about, it was like you said, like, this is just of the devil, which makes it sound like absolutely terrible. Like, oh my gosh, I'm being satanic for thinking, for being angry. Like it's horrible. But, you know, as we've gotten out of the church and I look back on it and, you know, process emotions, I feel like I do a better job of processing emotions, realizing that anger is a completely normal thing to feel. And it's a process, you know, it's a normal thing that people go through, and it shouldn't be like demonized.
No, I totally agree. Anger is, it's just a normal emotion like any other emotion. And I mean, yeah, you can take it too far. It can actually affect your like blood pressure and things like that if you let it get out of hand, obviously, or if you take it to an extreme and you harm other people or whatever it may be, then it's a bad thing. But I think it can be constructive in some ways. For instance, if you're trying to, you know, make a breakthrough at a job or something else and you fail, some people have the emotion of anger when they fail. And I think that can, you know, help drive them to do better or try harder or work harder. And that's definitely a positive thing.
Yeah. Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. What about you, Jared? Where have you come to in all this?
See, I think that in general conference, they have a lot of ideas that are almost good, you know? Like, I think that
I feel like I want to put that on one of those acrostic things. Like, they have ideas that are almost good.
Yeah,
that would be perfect.
I think they could be good ideas if, when you talk to that many people, when you have that much authority, you ought to be incredibly precise in your speech. And I don't know that they really are. They always seem like very prepackaged ideas. There's sort of this unwritten list of approved ways to say things, and they all just kind of funnel through that filter. And because, I don't know, nobody really wants to break the mold of general conference talks anymore. So I think that there is a good idea of sort of thinking of your anger as something that you ought not be a slave to. I don't think that I should react based on, like, I don't think I should base my actions on what I think I should do when I'm at my worst. I think I need to wait a second, obviously. Like, me and my brother, we used to have these, we would take pool noodles and just beat the hell out of each other with them. And it was a fun time. But anytime I would get hit in the face, I would just like see red. And I would want to pound him. I would want to throw the noodle down and just beat him with my fist. And I didn't. Like, that's just my reaction. That's what my anger sort of did to me. And I would have to take a step back and be like, okay, that's a stupid reaction. You are hitting somebody with a noodle and they're hitting you back. You're going to get hit with a noodle. But, yeah. So I think it could be explained much more clearly and beautifully, but they just don't really care to, I guess. I don't know. They care more for theatrics, it seems like, for you know, crying and grand presentation rather than the little minute different meanings between specific words.
So it seems like they also, I mean, they say it as like a very black and white statement, like anger is always bad.
Yep.
And I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they say it like, it's like a black and white statement, and we all know this. And since we all know this, I don't have to explain to you why this is. So if you're going to tell me that anger is always bad, explain to me why anger is always bad. Don't just say anger is always bad anyway, and then move on to your next point.
Say so.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I've heard it said that anger is kind of like a transitionary emotion, that like you feel anger and it's informative. It helps you understand like this thing is safe in my life, or this thing is not safe in my life, or I feel this need to act aggressively toward that to protect myself, whether it's physically or emotionally, or both. I think usually both. And then so we like use that energy to go into that, you know. And then I think I think where we get in trouble is where like the anger like sits and festers, and we don't have any good place to put that energy into, you know? Yeah. Like for a lot of us, as we go through our faith transition, we go through the stages of grief, and anger is a huge part of that. And it sucks when you get like stuck in that phase of anger, you know, for any reason. But I agree with you, Jared, too. Like, you don't want to be doing things that require your like logical brain thinking when you're feeling really angry, right? Because when you're feeling really angry, like that logical part of your brain isn't really fully functioning, you know, like they say you lose IQ points and you're not really thinking straight. And so, like you said, it's good to like take a minute and cool down before you like do something about it, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I mean, obviously it's different in like life or death situations. I mean, if someone's punching your little brother in the face, I think it's totally fine to act on your anger and go beat the crap out of that dude.
Yeah.
I'm talking about fighting. I don't mean to.
I guess that's why we have it in the first place, right? So anyway, okay. So thank you so much about anger. So then he talks about this question that he puts forth in his talk. He says, how do we keep these divine commandments, meaning love God and love your neighbor, in a world where we also are subject to the laws of man? And I like, oh my gosh, I've read this talk like so many times and I still don't get it. Like, why would that be a question? Why would you not be able to keep the laws of God and the laws of the land? Like, do you guys have any idea where he was going with that?
Not really. I mean, I've heard this a bunch growing up in the church, and they always taught it in a way that made it sound like if you are following all the laws of God, then you by default follow all the laws of the land. And
yeah,
so it was just kind of like, oh, I'll just do what the church says and I'm good, you know. But it's not that simple, and there are a lot of things that the church teaches that just don't really seem to line up that well.
Well, especially because the laws of the land change a lot over time. Yeah. I mean, just in the last couple hundred years, how much of the laws changed.
And the church tends to wait until things change in the world to jump on and be like, oh, yeah. Divine revelation. This new thing.
We don't have
and they're like way behind.
About.
Yeah.
All those things. Yes. So he says an essential part of loving our enemies is to keep the laws of our various countries. Again, like, I don't know why that's an essential part of loving our enemies.
So I think the only thing I was able to really glean from it is that, and this isn't my opinion, this is sort of my Oaks hat, I guess, is that when he says an essential part of loving your neighbor is obeying the law of the land, maybe, I guess he's probably referring to keeping like a law-abiding community or something. But honestly, that was one of the very first points of cognitive dissonance I can remember in my early life, was that, I think is it the second article of faith? One of the articles of faith where it says, we believe in being subjects to kings, magistrates, blah, 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 obeying the law of the land, essentially.
It's the 12th one, yeah. He quotes that in the talk.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. It's 12th.
Well, I've been telling people it's the second one forever, so I feel stupid.
Shame on your primary teacher.
But I remember I heard that, and the example that I always use is Daniel in the lion's den, but there's so many examples from the Bible that has bothered me. I remember the law of the land was Daniel wasn't allowed to pray. So according to this article of faith, Daniel was committing an immoral act by doing something illegal. And I think that's sort of the problem with this talk, is that it sort of conflates legality with morality. And I don't think any Mormon would say those two are the same if you were to ask them. But like in practice, that's what this talk seems to be sort of pushing toward.
Yeah. I'm so glad he talked about that with Daniel in the lion's den. Like, why didn't I think of that? That's such a good example of like, here's a completely contradictory thing where in order to follow the laws of God, he had to disobey the laws of the land.
Yeah, sort of implies
and
I'm sure there's tons of those stories in the scriptures. I mean,
yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is another one where they were supposed to be worshiping the golden statue because the king commanded it, and they wouldn't.
Abinadi, he was not supposed to be teaching.
Yeah,
he obeyed the law of the land by burning him to death for talking about Jesus. So what can you do?
Too bad.
Did you guys hear about there was a teenager during the Nazi Germany time, Helmut Hubener? So 1937, Hubert J. Grant goes to visit Nazi Germany, and he basically tells the Saints, they're like, hey, don't cause any trouble. Like, don't stir stuff up. That's not who we are. We're just like going to be peaceful and like not do anything, right? We're going to follow the laws of the land. Anyway, so 5 years later, there's this teenager that starts learning different things, and he starts listening to the BBC on the radio, which was hugely illegal. And then he started distributing pamphlets containing information that he'd heard on the radio, also very illegal. So he was arrested at age 17, sentenced to death, and so he died by guillotine. So there's like another example where like literally intentionally going against the laws of the land in order to do what's right, loving your enemies. Now, I don't think he considered Jewish people to be his enemies, but, you know, they were different from him. You know, he was a Mormon kid.
Yeah, I think he was actually the youngest person to ever be executed by the Nazis or something like that. I was actually, like, it's funny you bring it up. One of my friends sent me something on that just like a week ago. That was a cool story.
Yeah, yeah. And then, I mean, there's all sorts of things like in our own church history where, you know, the Mormons did things that were not necessarily legal.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mountain Meadows.
Lots of stuff Joseph Smith did. I mean, lots of stuff.
So many things. You never know until you start learning.
He did it at the point of a flaming sword, okay? So judge not. You'd marry a 14-year-old too.
The poor guy. He had no choice.
Have some sympathy.
He had no choice. Oh my god.
Okay, all right. So moving on. So in this talk, something that he hits on over and over and over again is his like condemning of non-peaceful protests. He's all like, peaceful protests are the way to go. That's the way to get things done. That's the approved way. That's the authorized way. And he like really nails us in so many times. I counted at least 7 times where he was like, non-peaceful protests are so bad, everybody. So he really, really doesn't like non-peaceful protests. Do you guys think that there's a place and time for non-peaceful protests? And this is like just your opinions, and this is like, it's okay if we disagree, you know, this is, I just want to know what like you guys are thinking right now. And it's okay if, like, this is different from what you used to think, or you guys change minds in the future. I want to see like, what are you guys' thoughts on this just right now?
My first thought that comes to mind every time that I think or hear about this is, I mean, our nation's independence. It's just like, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
We definitely rebelled and we're not peaceful. And that led to the freedom of our country. And that kind of had to happen, or we'd all still be under the rule of a king. So for him to say stuff like that is like, they act like they're so like, our founding fathers were amazing, all this stuff, but then they like blatantly just ignore that kind of fact. It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird. For my part of it, I definitely absolutely think there's a time where protests shouldn't be peaceful or don't necessarily have to be peaceful. I mean, a lot of people, when you start talking about this kind of stuff, bring up Martin Luther King Jr. Without acknowledging the fact that those protests were mostly peaceful, but it was the police that were causing, you know, violence or inciting violence, and the people were fighting back. And I also think that, I mean, you think about today, I read online that 93% of racial justice protests are peaceful. And a lot of times the violence is started by the police. And as far as Oaks goes, with him, saying and continuing to say over and over that it's never okay for a protest to turn violent. I feel like if it was, if it was made illegal for you to be Mormon or something, like, I mean, there's just like lots of scenarios in which I could see them being like, well, we don't necessarily have to be peaceful. I mean, and two, like, all of the countless wars in the Book of Mormon over everything. It's like, they're incredibly violent, and same in the Bible. I'm like, we have to be so peaceful, but like,
went and cut off Laban's head. Laban kind of threatened him, if I'm remembering correctly. He didn't like outright attack him, did he?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, at the time he was unconscious, so
yeah.
So Nephi,
he was not a threat at all.
Nephi delivered the first strike of violence, and then robbed the guy. I mean,
yeah.
There's just so much hypocrisy. The whole thing is just loaded with hypocrisy, and it kind of drives me insane. That was one of the big kickers for me with the church, is, starting to look through some of the information and my shelf starting to become fragile and about to fall. Is just like everything they were saying was like, it was hypocritical. Everything.
Thanks for you for recognizing that.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this because I like to have, I guess I don't exactly have a first principle on which to base when violence is justified. I mean, obviously self-defense, that seems like something that pretty much everybody agrees on. And if they don't, I'm just not really going to listen to them. But you're right. With the founding fathers, they kind of view them, for whatever reason, they view them as something different than what they are, because they were rebels. They were rebelling against the country. And it's a piss off a lot of Mormons, but I feel like if the Mormon church were around back then, the way that it is now, they would have been like, no, you need to obey the king. Don't dump the tea in the ocean or whatever. And
so true.
Yeah, for sure.
I absolutely agree.
They'd be the king of religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of the riots that are going on right now. And most of the protests are peaceful. And I'm glad that he supported that. He did seem, and some people might say it's lip service, and it might be, but at least it's lip service that is a good thing. I think that whether or not you agree with the cause that people are protesting for, I think that protest is it's an American pastime. It's the only time I get patriotic, I guess. But I do think that, I guess, if a Christian sect is going to err one way or the other, I would sort of prefer them to err on the side of saying, hey, don't hurt people or burn down their property.
That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely.
If they're gonna lie about everything, the least they can do is tell people to be decent.
Yeah, it made me wonder too, like, who is he talking to? Like, these over and over and over condemning non-peaceful protests. Like, did you see a whole lot of members of the church causing riots and being like violent in these protests? Like, is that a big problem among our membership? I don't think it is. Like, who are you talking to?
I did notice that he mentioned, when and if a new president is elected, that they would not condone violence if people weren't happy with the outcome. And I respected that, and I feel like I do know a lot of Mormons that, let's just say, like, for argument's sake, if Donald Trump did not win, I have Mormon family that would be upset. And if Donald Trump decided to, like, literally, if he said, I'm not leaving office, I want you to back me up, I have family that would do that. And that's not an exaggeration. So I mean, I think it was good for him to say we would not support that, just so that, you know, Mormons who have their priorities, church first, America second, would follow the church on that point.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I think that's another time where like credit where credit is due. It's a really good thing that you said that. I'm glad that you did. Definitely.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I liked it because it was like a definitive statement. He was like,
yeah,
we accept this. We accept the outcome of elections. And I think maybe one of the reasons that General Conference is just so boring for us now is that it feels like general authorities just don't have any balls. Like,
yeah.
like I mean, if you have a bunch of weird, crazy beliefs, at least own them. Like, yeah, we're going to be gods.
Right?
So
talk about that rock in the hat and the polygamy.
Yeah.
I would have loved it if there were a lot more specifics in General Conference. Like instead of talking about like these are the principles that we believe in and these are the things that Jesus said about it. And here's like an example from tons of years ago. Like, how about we get some like more specifics? Like in this talk in particular, something that really, really bothered me was he gave these two specifics. One, stop violently protesting. And number two, accept the outcome of the presidential election and wait another 4 years for things to change if you don't like it. That was it. And for a leader talking so much about racism in this talk, like, why didn't he give more concrete examples? Like he said peaceful protest, like that is the authorized way to raise awareness on issues. Like, why didn't you raise any awareness about this? Like you literally have all of us staring at you right now. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What are you going to say to us? What issues are you going to raise our awareness about? Nothing. He didn't take the opportunity to say anything except like, racism is just bad, so we need to cut it out.
Whoa, calm down now. It's only been 42 years since God last talked about race, so let's... He's very slow on that.
That's the hard thing is the church has so much like really, really awful racist stuff in their past, and for them to come out and be like, don't be racist, but not ever own up and be like, we're really sorry for all this stuff. This stuff was horrible. Make up for it in some way, shape, or form. I can't really ever expect them to cover more than he did because it's just so touchy and everybody already calls them out on it as is. And he's just barely skimming the surface. Just don't be racist.
Yeah. That bothered me a lot, like going through the talk, just being like him saying over and over, like, racism is bad. We should not do that. And this country has not been great in the past. And I was just over here like, who are you and your religion to be talking right now? You contributed to it so much. And it's been fairly recent. So it's just like, it was bothersome.
I guess also if you want to condemn riots and like angry protesting, maybe if you think it's important to talk about race, and because he clearly at least says that that's important, but that's the only time I've ever heard him talk about race. It's the only time I've ever heard anyone talk about racism as long as I can remember in General Conference. And it's the only year that it's the first year in a long time we've had these crazy amounts of like protests and like actual violent riots and things like that. And so I'm like, if you really want to condemn violent rioting, well, you're kind of showing them that violent rioting works by, I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about it. Oh, you burned down a building. Okay, I'll talk about it.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. I mean, that is kind of crazy. Like when you bring it up now, I think on it, I'm like, I don't really remember them talking very much about it other than like maybe a quote here and there that, I just happened to see floating around, but I don't remember as a member, somebody ever sitting down and in conference going over racism in depth. No. I don't remember that happening.
No, probably touched on a little bit here and there, but
it almost seems like a ploy to stay relevant. Like, oh, this is happening. Like I'll try to talk about it because this is important in the world right now.
I always try to look deeper than just the surface of what he's saying. So they're hemorrhaging members because people have the internet, and so this, to me, it is a ploy where they're targeting the younger generation outside the church that isn't that familiar with it, that is going to see, oh, this guy is against racism. That's a really good thing, but they have no clue about all the rest of the stuff that's gone on in the past. So they're trying these last ditch efforts to try and scrape members in because they're losing so many. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. And he had this opportunity to be like a real leader when it comes to being anti-racist and teaching people how to do that. Because if it was easy to do, it would be gone already, right? If it was just like, we need to do better at rooting out racism as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we need to do a better job. Like, okay, then how? Because like, clearly it's not gone yet. So it must be difficult to do, right?
Right.
So, and then
if these guys have direct communication with the God, I'm sure that he would have some ideas. Like,
great.
That's the part.
Throw us a bone,
The other thing that lowers their credibility is like, you guys claim to be prophets, but nothing that I see in any of this is any more than just a regular person could say. Like, where is your like special plan to end racism now or this year? Here's how we get rid of it. This is coming from God. Like, if they would do that sort of thing, I mean, they're probably just saying that if they were to, but at least it would be like, they're really putting some effort into making a major change with something that, like, honestly should have been ended a long time ago.
Yeah. So, what is his name? This author, he wrote the book called How to Be Anti-Racist. And he's got like some specific things in there on like how to recognize it, what it looks like, and first of all, what racism even means and what that looks like. Because it doesn't look like, I just want all of them to die. I think my race is the best one and everyone else should just be enslaved. Like, that's not what it looks like. It's so much different and more nuanced than that, right? And so like, he could have gone into talking about that. He could have gone into talking about like, here's how we recognize it within ourselves. He could have talked about like, here's what microaggressions are, and here's how we can stop doing that, and here's how we can support people who are having a hard time. And never once did he ever talk about the causes of the protests. Like, he talked so much at length about the protests. And he even said, I've got to read this because this was like my not favorite part. He said, here we go. The Savior's teachings to love our enemies is based on the reality that all mortals are beloved children of God. That eternal principle and some basic principles of law were tested in the recent protests in many American cities. And I was like, all the swear words, like, I'm sorry, that was tested during the protests? What about what led up to the protests? Like, what everybody's protesting, like, that didn't occur to you that those events, all that, like the police brutality that they're protesting, that wasn't showing that people aren't taking for seriously the Savior's teaching that all children are children of God. That part made me so mad. Here I am under the influence of Satan, giving into my anger.
So satanic.
So we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to just like really give this its time. Is he says, knowing that we are all children of God gives us a divine vision of the worth of all others and the will and ability to rise above prejudice and racism. So, for me, I think we just kind of talked about that. Like, it's not enough to just know we're all children of God and therefore we treat each other as we want to be treated, and that we don't have any kind of racist ideas or racist attitudes, like not even in the slightest, right?
If that had been the case, Brigham Young wouldn't have even had slaves, right? I mean,
it's almost exactly what I was going to say. Like, let's talk about, what do you guys know about the Mormon history in their dealings with Native Americans? Because, like, I'm going to say, as Mormons, we knew that Native Americans were children of God, right? They're descendants of the Lamanites. So knowing that they were children of God, they were still treated as way less than, like, less valiant, less moral, savages that needed to be tamed, you know, like you were saying, like Brigham Young owned slaves. He owned Black slaves, and he also owned Native American slaves. Well, I don't know about him personally, but I know that, like, during his time, people in Utah, Mormons, owned Native American slaves as well. That was like a really messy, complicated time. But what am I missing? Like, what else do you guys know about Native Americans and Mormons?
Well, I mean, have you guys seen that, like, viral video that's been on the internet, like, really recently, that shows the videotape of the it was like a little kids, basically like living scriptures thing from like the late 70s or early 80s, with the little white boy and a little Native American girl.
So bad.
And her saying, "Oh, like, because I'm righteous, Heavenly Father turned my skin white. Aren't I beautiful?" It's made for children.
It's horrible. Like,
it's really bad. And this is just kind of coming up, but that was, I think, 70s or 80s. I can't remember for sure, but it's not a long time ago. Yeah, like, it's not that long ago.
Man.
So,
was that under Spencer
and that's what people believed.
Sorry.
It probably,
I don't know.
Probably would have been.
But there's a good chance that, like, our generation of parents or aunts and uncles grew up watching that kind of stuff, and that's
they did, for sure.
Kind of.
I mean, and not only with the Native Americans, but with that Joseph Smith had an African American woman that was sealed to him as an eternal servant.
Yeah.
And that was in, I think, like 1860s or something, after he had died. But I mean, to say, like, oh, all we need to do is know that we're all children of God, when they've been preaching that since the 1830s, and then acting this way, is just ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
Practice what you preach, and they just don't.
That's clearly not enough, right?
See, I think
Jared, any thoughts?
Well, I think I'd be pretty. I don't know. It would be. It'd be annoying to be around, or to hear the Mormon Church, what they have to say about, my race, if I were like a minority race of any minority, but, like, I think especially if I were Native American, and because I think I would grow up thinking, whoa, this is cool. They have the history of my people here. Like we didn't have quite as much, like, we didn't write our history out quite as well. So they have, like, documents of how my people got here and what they did and their cultures. That's amazing. And then at some point I find out that's total nonsense. I'm going to be crushed. Like, I thought we were like this, I thought we had this big story, man, this rich, beautiful history of it, which, I could then say, like, I'm sure we still do have a rich, beautiful history, but I thought I knew what it was exactly. And then it was taken away from me by reality. And who am I going to be mad at that point? Reality? Like,
yeah.
I did have,
not only
on my mission, this dude, I was waiting for my visa, and I was in South Dakota for a little bit. And we had this member, he's a really funny guy, really nice guy. And he was autistic, and he had, when you teach somebody about, because most Mormons, I think, when you teach them your skin turns brown the more you sin in the Book of Mormon thing, I think most of them can kind of say, well, that goes directly on the shelf because we don't like that. But his mind didn't quite work that way. To him, that's just how it is, because that's what they told him it was. This is the true church. That's what they told him it was. So we had a Native American family in that branch, and they stopped going because one day this guy actually, like, word for word said, your skin's that way because of an ancient curse. and and everyone's like, oh no, we can't let him talk to people anymore. Like, no, he's not really the problem. How can you blame him? He's he's just telling the guy what
quoting the doctrine.
He doesn't quite have that wherewithal to put that thing on the back of the shelf,
or to understand why people would want to put that on the back of the shelf.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, and the church has taught fairly recently as well. I mean, all through the 1900s, that if you were born a different race than white, it was because you were less valiant in the premortal life,
or have some kind of physical disability or something. There's a quote that lists both.
Yeah, race and disabilities are because you were less valiant or not as good or whatever. So
imagine joining the church and just like hearing that and being like, so
yeah,
I got punished from the get-go because of something I can't even remember that you're claiming I did. Like, it just seems like kicking someone when they're down.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
there's already all this racism in the world. Yeah.
And you add this make-believe crap to it that just, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine feeling what they must feel.
It also didn't quite make sense to me. Because the first time I ever heard that was on my mission. And it was one of our assistants to the president. He was explaining to us that he bought the whole doctrine that, like, black people in the pre-existence were fence sitters. They didn't choose Satan's side, but they also didn't choose God's side. And that's why they were born with black skin. And he's explaining this to us, and I was shocked because I had never heard it before. And I was like, that cannot be true. There's no way that's true. And he's like, no, it's true. You got to listen to these talks and stuff. I'm more spiritual than you.
Oh my God.
And he
mission sounds like so much fun right now, by the way. I never went on a mission, but like, kind of glad I didn't.
Be glad you didn't.
I hated it. No, but he had like a whole hierarchy in his mind of who was the most valiant, and he worked it up to saying like, well, the most valiant souls were born like to Mormon families, like in largely Mormon.
Oh yeah, I heard that.
Utah. And we had this missionary hanging out with us who was a Brazilian convert, and he's like, what the fuck? And,
oh my gosh.
And I was like, what?
Oh my gosh.
And he goes, oh, but
yeah,
being an early convert is almost as good. And that never made sense to me. We had a lot of so I was like, that doesn't quite make sense. If you have your soul, if your goal is to get the most souls back to you as possible, you have the most valiant soul, why would you take that soul and give them the least amount of burden? Like, why would you put them to where they already have the gospel, they already have, a strong family structure, all the values that you want them to, and they don't have to go find it? Because I would think that my strongest souls would be the ones I place the furthest away.
Exactly.
Because they're the ones I trust the most to find the truth.
Yeah, definitely.
That's not how it works.
We just don't want them to have blessings, that's all.
Yeah, it goes back to like being born from a righteous lineage,
Yeah.
You get to be born from pioneer stock. Or whatever.
Yay!
Oh, boy.
Are you pioneer stock?
Oh yeah.
I'm not totally sure if I am.
I am all the way back.
Mormons for generations. I
mean, I think I'm like, we're like 7th generation.
That's all the way back.
Is it?
Yeah, that's all the way back.
Okay, well, there you go.
Wow. Look at you, righteous souls. My parents were converts. Yeah. I grew up on the East Coast. So.
Oh, I'm sorry that you guys weren't as righteous in the pre-existence.
I'm plenty evil now, trust me.
My dad's family were redneck drunks back until like the 1400s. My mom's family were they were Jack Mormons for a long time.
Do you have any like extended family or like parents, grandparents generation who hosted or who participated in the Indian placement program and like had Native American Indian children in their home for a while that they were helping to raise or school or whatever?
I actually didn't know that had happened, so that's new info to me.
Yeah,
I don't have any as far as I know.
Okay. I do have some on my in-laws side. Like they participate in that whole program. So I think I want to say it started back in like the 40s and 50s in America. It was this like government type thing to assimilate Native Americans into society. So instead of like just pushing them further and further and further into these reservations and smaller and smaller and smaller land, and then like flaking out on their trees with Native Americans, they decided that wasn't enough. Like they also needed to assimilate their children into white society, cut their hair, shame them from speaking their native language, help let them like not even learn about their native heritage at all, and by so doing, wipe out Native Americans. Like this was like a legit government program to do that. And so they created all these boarding schools for Native American children, and they sold it as this kind of thing where like they were saying to Native American parents, okay, I see you guys are stuck in poverty. Like, don't you want your kids to go to a nice, rich, white school where they can learn the English language and have like more opportunities in their life? And I mean, it really gives a whole new meaning to that song that you guys might have. I know I learned in elementary school. I don't know about you guys. It's like, go my son, go and earn your feather, go my son, something, get an education. You guys know what I'm talking about?
I have heard that. Yeah.
So not only
sounds very dark.
Did we commit physical genocide on them? That's not enough. Now we have to do emotional and complete mental genocide on like their entire
culture,
history, culture. That's so messed up.
Yeah, so messed up. And there was this even like musical group called the Lamanite Generation back in the 70s or whatever, and they sang that song too. It was like written by some BYU people. Anyway, and then just like became a hit around the country, like, oh yeah, we're celebrating Native Americans by singing this amazing song with this like apparently dark history and context. Anyway, so long story short, the Mormon church decided to pick up kind of where the government left off with these placement programs. And they didn't build boarding schools, but they just had Native American children come into homes with Mormons. And so now not only were they going to shame them from learning their native language and as a selling point, like give them an education, and help them have opportunities in life, but also convert them to Mormonism as well. And so there's like so many ethical things going on there. It was really terrible. And nowadays there's like kids that went through the program that are suing the Mormon church for what they did and how they sold it and how it was done. And then there like wasn't a lot of oversight. So a lot of these kids got abused. It was just like, it was so bad. So, I mean, just like really getting back to the point that we were trying to make, going all the way back to Elder Oaks' talk, it's not enough to think, yeah, everyone's a child of God, so therefore we're not racist. I'm not racist because I think that they're all children of God. That's exactly what happened with all these Native Americans in our own church history. So
that's apparently what we've believed for almost 200 years. Yet look at all of this.
So I think this is like the last point that I wanted to make. This is the last of my notes. So and then after this, I'll give you guys some time to add your final thoughts too. But this whole talk, like you were saying, Jared, like lip service, so much lip service to this. And at least it was lip service, you know, because it's like, we haven't even gotten lip service for this kind of thing. But when you're a leader like this and you have so much influence and you're telling people all you got to do is just like love people as you love yourself and believe that they're children of God, and then racism is gone and dead, like what a terribly irresponsible thing to be teaching people. Oh, and he talks so much about like obedience to the laws, right? Like loyalty to the Constitution, loyalty to the laws of the land. And this is how we're going to root out racism. And it's like, no, you're perpetuating it. You are literally perpetuating it by teaching these incredibly false ideas that have been around for a long time. You're not the originator of these ideas, but clearly you've never done your homework, or you have, and you just want to preach this garbage anyway. So that's kind of where I wanted to leave it off with. I just like, it's a confusing talk. He talks about loving the Constitution so much, but not, and loving people, but not actually giving like concrete ideas for how to go about rooting out racism. So any final thoughts? We'll start with you, Jared. Anything else you wanted to add?
I think part of the problem is that there's a big disconnect in communication, right? Because on one side, you've got people like Oaks, and I don't know if it was lip service, because that kind of, that sort of sounds like me saying I could read his mind or whatever, but
That's fair.
And his idea is kind of, if you truly do believe everyone is a child of God, then, well, why would anyone be racist? If everybody had that belief, why would anyone be racist? And I understand that. And I think the disconnect between sort of the two sides of this is that you got the Oaks side, where they're saying, yeah, we need to stop being racist. We need to stop the individual from being racist. And then you got, the other side, where they're saying, no, we need to stop the system from being racist. And so that's why it doesn't really translate very well when they're trying to talk to each other, because I think a lot of times they don't understand that there is this difference in communication. Because he'll be like, what do you mean racist? I'm not racist. I think everyone's a child of God. And then the other side is like, well, maybe you individually don't think they're bad people for being minorities, but there's this whole system or whatever. And I don't know. I think maybe there is something to be said about, I don't know, when somebody says these things like everyone is a child of God, encouraging them to latch onto that. Because I think that is, I'm not religious or anything, but I think that's an incredibly valuable belief, is because one of the most, again, I'm not religious, but I like a lot of the teachings of Jesus in the Bible, and probably maybe the most beautiful teaching that I've seen from him is in as much as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me, right? And there's that whole, my seminary teacher did this, a lot of seminary teachers did it. They'd have you draw a picture of the person that you hate, and you throw darts at it, and then he takes all the pictures off, and it's Jesus, and there's holes in him that you've thrown. And I think a lot of people might think that's really guilt-inducing or whatever, but I actually kind of liked it. I thought I gleaned a very good message from it, because if they were to understand that their doctrine, that specific doctrine, it elevates each individual person, and he even says the least of these. And he's saying it like, from your point of view, whoever you think is the least, the homeless dude, or whoever you don't like specifically, you can't be mean to him. That's like being mean to me. And that takes whoever you think is the least person, and it elevates them to the status of deity. Like, that's, Jesus is the deity. He is God who came to atone for your sins. And if this dude on the street is just as valuable as he is, that's a big deal. And I think it would behoove Mormon leaders to really hit home that point, and to really learn how to articulate that very well.
They need to hire you to write their talks for them.
No.
That was so much more beautiful than almost everything I heard the entire conference long.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't packaged, I guess. It wasn't really approved.
No, clear. Clearly you're a prophet.
I only take 5%, so.
Sign me up.
Back to charity, right?
He just laughs. Yeah, charity. All right, how about you, Lexi? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the last thing that I would want to mention is my final thoughts, just because, like we talked about, Dallin Oaks didn't go into it at all, is that it's important for us to start recognizing what racism is, and being able to teach that to our children, make it more normalized part of society. So, I mean, you mentioned the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Another one that I read when the protests started happening, I wanted to be better educated on it, was White Fragility. It really, I mean, it was really good for me to start understanding, like, what exactly, like, where is the racism in my life? What am I doing wrong? How have I contributed? And how can I make sure that I raise my kids in a way that's going to give them, you know, the best education on this kind of thing? I really feel like that's what should have been addressed during this conference. So I don't know, as individuals, since we're not members of the church, but maybe as ex-members or people who are interested in this kind of content, we should be doing our best to educate ourselves so that we aren't contributing knowingly or unknowingly to the problem.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much for pointing that out. You know, Elder Oaks didn't do a very good job, but maybe you can write us talk next time, Jared and Lexi. Brendon, last thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I just think it's funny that in his talk he brings up that the early saints are persecuted. It's like always got to be this thing where they talk about, oh, we're so persecuted, we were so disrespected, and blah blah blah. But it pales in comparison to the disrespect and the awful things that the church as an organization and individual members have done to minorities, to women, to children, to even just other men. It's anybody and everybody. They've treated people poorly throughout history. And for them to turn it back on themselves and be like, we're the victims here, when your prophet was, I mean, you guys were being persecuted and pushed out of states because you were breaking the law and doing terrible things to people, taking people's wives. Just, I think it's crazy the amount of, like, I don't know, the word that I'm looking for, the gall, for him to have the gall to say those kinds of things when, I mean, he knows full well what the church has done in its history. I'm sure they all know it back and forth. And that also needs to stop. They need to stop acting like they're the most meek and humble and so much more persecuted than everyone else, when that just shouldn't even be brought up at this point.
Absolutely.
I think that's all I've got to add, but yeah.
Yeah. Lexi, you said something that made me think of like our responsibility and our journey in becoming anti-racist. And I think what helped me is to not define racism as this is a super immoral thing for a person to be, and it is part of their identity that they are racist or that they are a racist. I don't think anybody in the whole world, no matter what they believe or what they do, would identify it and say, that's not true. I'm sure there's some people, but like the kind of people that I would say, oh yeah, that person's really racist, like would not say the same, like I identify as racist. And I think that's really important that we recognize, like, it's not it's not this definition where it's like, this is who you are, or this is a big part of who you are and your identity as being a racist. Instead, it's this like, this like complex web of little thoughts and ideas and attitudes that are inside you because that's how you were raised, because that's how you were conditioned by your family or society or church history or like everything around you, you know, like the billions of interactions that you have and things that you see on TV and ads and stuff. All of these formed like lots of tiny little things inside you. And so as we go about our journey, like be patient with yourself. Understand like this is going to take time to untangle this web, to pick out each little idea and get rid of it, you know. And if you find like you still have some knee-jerk reactions, you know, part of your conditioning, so to speak, understand like that's okay. It's part of a process. You're working on it. Now that you can see it, you're going to get rid of it. But the hard work, I think, really comes in. How do we see those things that are such blind spots for us? And what helped me was recognizing like I can still have a lot of sexist ideas in me because of how I was raised. Like in the church, we say like, oh, women and women are just equal. They're equal partners. But at the same time, like the actual structure and the hierarchy of the church and everything that happens in the temple and so many other things speak a whole different narrative about that, right? And so I've internalized like all these little things that really are sexist. I've identified as, no, that's not sexist. You know, those aren't sexist ideas. I can keep those. And so the hard work comes in recognizing like, let's take that out. Let's inspect and like throw away these old ideas and unlearn them, right? So like it's a process. Give yourself grace, give yourself time, but like don't delay working on it, you know. So I think that's all that I wanted to say. Anything else before we end? Anybody?
No, I think this was good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. I knew that I could not cover this material adequately myself, and I appreciate all of what all of you had to say so much. I appreciate your different opinions. I appreciate your different viewpoints and everything that you guys brought to the discussion. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing all the cool content that you guys are going to come out with, because you're all amazing. And Jared, shout out to your wife, Morgan, who isn't here with us tonight, but she's amazing as well. You guys are fantastic. We want to see more of Sister Jensen, by the way. She's the best. So we miss her here tonight. But I can't say thank you enough. Thank you guys so much. And I hope you all have a great evening.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank
you too.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
I know the Mormon Church's racist past seems like ancient history, but it really wasn't that long ago. I remember as a little girl the day the priesthood ban against black members was lifted. This film strip, it was kind of like the living scriptures of its day. It was a dramatized version of the Book of Mormon for children.
This is my friend. She is a good Lamanite. Her grandparents were converted to the church by Ammon the missionary.
Look what Heavenly Father has done. See my skin? Isn't it pretty and white? Heavenly Father made my skin white. All righteous Lamanites now have a white skin. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, I look so pretty.
The Mormon Church is backing off this teaching now, but it's in the Book of Mormon, and this is what my whole generation was taught when we were kids.